In this video, I'd like to talk about therapy for trauma. And right out of the gate, I'd like to preface, I'm not a licensed professional. I trained as a therapist, but I'm not licensed in any way, so I don't want to present myself as something that I'm not. Furthermore, a lot of the opinions I'm going to express here are based more on my own experiences, both personally and working with people, as opposed to like some sort of best standard or research-backed. And it could be that a lot of things match the research, and it could be some of the things are actually somewhat controversial. So I invite you to also do your own research. But hopefully some of the stuff that I have to say either resonates personally with you or makes sense, or is something that, sparks a different way of thinking about things. So let's start with the fact that in the last few years, there's been a lot of recognition in the psychology community of just how pervasive trauma is and how deep an impact it has. There's been a whole new field of trauma-informed therapy and special trainings in that regard for having therapists with the right amount of understanding and being informed by it. And that's all really great. It is really important. It's a travesty that until now that wasn't the case. Trauma is an emerging field almost in certain ways. Now, I come to this space from somebody who has been deeply traumatized in my own life. I was diagnosed not by a psychiatrist, but by my therapist as having complex PTSD from what I went through. And so a lot of the things that are being discovered in the world of trauma therapy is things that I've lived with my whole life and were obvious to me. So I think some of it comes from the fact that it's being discovered by people who didn't experience trauma themselves and are now kind of discovering it as if it's new, whereas for me it was kind of a given. At the same time, it can be really helpful when someone comes to you and says, that thing that you take for granted, that way in which you go through the world, that's actually a trauma response. And there's so many of those. So what we're discovering is that trauma is extremely pervasive. And if you've experienced a traumatizing event, or worse, several traumatizing events that stack upon each other, or where you weren't able to escape from them, this really affects a lot of the way that you go through the world, especially if this was in your childhood. And even if not, it can affect the way your brain is wired. Now, the good news is we can rewire our brain. Our brains are extremely elastic and extremely plastic, and we can actually over time change how our brain processes things. But our brain enters this emergency mode and starts to perceive everything as a threat, and there's so many repercussions for that. You continuously live with too high levels of cortisol. You can be frightened easily. You can be distracted. In fact, the way I approach almost all issues with my clients is the assumption that there is trauma there, and that is what caused the issue. I don't care if it's addiction, I don't care if it's ADHD, it's almost always a trauma-based response, because it is impossible to go through life untraumatized, and that leads to so many patterns that are not serving us well now, but are the residual effect of our body just trying to survive. So again, trauma is becoming much more pervasive. I see it as an extreme, like I assume everything is trauma based. So what can be done about it? There's a bunch of mainstream techniques. There's a realization that like CBT doesn't work as well for trauma. I think DBT is something that gets talked about more. EMDR is extremely popular for trauma. It is a very interesting process in which, as you discuss the traumatic experience, you actually are deliberately stimulating different sides of your body at the same time. The most common being eye movement. So your eyes will be tracking basically as you're talking about it, but it actually also works with tapping or even buzzers in different hands. That's how it's actually sometimes done remotely. So it's a fascinating way that for some reason it causes this sort of reintegration of different parts of your brain, or it the distraction that it does allows the brain to sort of heal itself. We actually do not know how EMDR works. It was almost discovered by accident, but it has actually been clinically proven to be of assistance. Now, there's a big debate in the world of trauma as to how it can be healed. So you're dancing around some sort of issue. There's a traumatic experience, and there's different ways in which people or therapists approach it. I am of the school that you need to re-explore the trauma, re-experience it from a strong and healthy place, and that releases the trauma that you have inside of you. This is a controversial opinion. There are those who believe that doing so is re-traumatizing you. There's a belief that it is not necessary to do that. from my own experience, overall, I found that to be a necessary part of healing. Is you have to, unfortunately, re-experience a lot of the discomfort, but do so in a safe and controlled place. And that can be really conducive towards releasing what you're carrying around inside you. That's how I conceive of it. You're carrying around a traumatic, there's a part of you that is re-experiencing the trauma all the time. And the only way that I have found one of the best ways that I have found, let's say that way, to overcome this is to actually re-explore it. Now, it doesn't mean you have to dive right back in completely. And when I do work with clients, first of all, I make sure that they're feeling safe and I make sure that they're in a good headspace. Furthermore, there's some interesting techniques where you can kind of like dance around it. You can sort of use this classic desensitization techniques that are often used in behavioral places. Let's say you have a fear of flying, so you slowly walk towards the airplane and then you go in it while it's taxiing and then you slowly take off. Or let's say you have a fear of snakes, so you stand at the other side of the room and you look at the snake and then you get closer, and it works. Behavioral therapy works because you have people at the end of a single session or a few sessions actually like petting spiders or doing other things that they were terrified before. And so taking the same approach to this traumatic experience and slowly getting towards it so you can actually explore it, so you're no longer afraid of it, so you've released the emotion that's trapped in it while still doing so while feeling safe. So we have techniques like, for example, imagining that it's on a TV screen and you've muted the volume and you've turned it to black and white and you feel safe enough that you can walk away at any time. Those types of techniques are what I use to help create a safe environment for people. But to ignore that, the way I've experienced it is once I've done this process, I feel like I can still remember those memories, those traumatic memories that I've had, but they don't have the same weight. They don't trigger me, as it were, the same way as before. And that to me is the goal, to diffuse the weight and the emotional burden of the trauma from your body, from the memory, so it becomes just a fact like any other, like what's the weather outside. And the process of doing so, it's referred to as catharsis. There's oftentimes crying. There's oftentimes you can see the body readjusting, because the research that we have on trauma shows that it is deeply stored in the body. Like it literally is in the body somewhere in the form of tension, in the form of, when I'm working with clients, there's these amazing somatic experiences. Some of them are very painful, but it's like you're re-experiencing this pain that's in your body, and it was there all along, and it's part of your body letting go. So it's worth touching upon some other research that's been done. There's fascinating discoveries being made in the world of psychedelics for healing trauma. Mushrooms, psilocybin, or MDMA are being found to be proven clinically to be helpful. The problem is it's a little bit difficult right now to be involved in that. You have to be clinically traumatized with PTSD or whatever it is, and you have to be through the clinical trials. Hopefully in the coming years, we're going to see that becoming a lot more mainstream. And it involves the process of consuming these psychedelics and essentially just sitting with yourself. The therapist actually takes a very passive role during the actual consumption. They actually take more of a role in building up a few sessions before, planning for the experience, and afterwards integrating back what you took from the experience back into your daily life and seeing how it heals you. So there's the before and after that's actually more important for the therapist's involvement. During the process, you actually just need somebody to help you feel safe and process anything that comes up, but you end up being quite passive. And I actually drew inspiration from that in the world of how we describe this hypnosis that I do with clients. That's oftentimes called psychedelic assisted therapy. And I actually refer to what we do as, excuse me, hypnosis assisted psychotherapy. But we're doing similar things. I deliberately am encouraging my clients, the people I work with, to alter their state of consciousness and to deliberately dive back in from a place of strength to those traumatic experiences and re-experience them in a healing way. And this is the experience on a somatic level, on a body felt level, that often happens in the world of psychedelics. But not everybody has access to psychedelics. Not everybody feels ready to use them. And I find that hypnosis is the closest thing to being able to facilitate this type of trauma work. So again, this is controversial. There are different takes on it. I strongly believe that our subconscious only shows us what we're ready to see. So in this whole debate of like, oh, suddenly this memory is going to emerge that you it's going to re-traumatize you. I don't agree with that concept. I believe that you're carrying that trauma around you all the time anyways, and it's just simply bringing it to the surface. And that can be destabilizing, certainly. That could be something that, keeps you in bed for a week. But man, you're carrying that inside you anyways. So this is unfortunately a necessary process of healing from trauma, is almost going through the destabilization of healing. As you recreate yourself in a more healthy way, there's a lot of process that needs to go through that. And I believe that your mind only shows you what you are ready to see. And if you're in the process of healing from trauma and suddenly you see details that you didn't remember because your mind previously suppressed it and kind of shoved it down so you don't have to deal with that on a daily basis, well, now it feels safe enough and ready enough to bring it up for you to deal with. And again, it is very unfortunate that you were traumatized, and it's unfortunate that the process of healing from trauma is so painful in its own right and so destabilizing, but that is the fact of the matter. And so working with somebody who recognizes how difficult it is to live with trauma, how difficult it is to heal from trauma, how it manifests in so many areas of your life, from the way you trust people to the way you talk to yourself to the way you mistrust your intuition or are unable to experience pleasure. There's so many ways that trauma affects us in our daily life, and diving deep and having the courage to re-explore that, diffuse that trauma, and go and integrate that back into a more healthy way of living. I commend you. I commend you for having the courage to do so, and I invite you to explore some of these different techniques that are out there to help you in your trauma healing.